Starting at the beginning.
Yeah, there were complaints last week.
Was that the complaints from one Ron Hayes?
Yeah, he wants to watch the tube. He wants to watch us, talk about movies in this fashion. Be like,
Hi, Ron.
movies.
This is the advantage of having the video chat, is that there's the video feed.
I think the conversations are better with video chat too.
I like the look in the eyes.
Yeah, you can see who's like trying to break in. Just like that. That's what I'm gonna do next time I comment. I'm gonna have.
You know what this needs? The what is this called? StreamYard. Yeah. It needs the thing like Microsoft Teams has, where you can virtually raise your hand.
I
agree.
Hate that. No, I fucking hate that so much. I like just interrupting people. Raise your hand, like what? Like they're like.
You know what? On the DSA, they have the stack thing. Have either of you guys ever attended a virtual DSA meeting?
I have once. The one that you invited me to.
Oh, yeah. So, like, if you have a thing you want to say while somebody else is talking, instead of, like, virtually raising your hand or typing your comment in the text chat, you instead write the word stack in the text chat, and they take all the people who wrote stack and they make a list. And sometimes they reorganize the list based on, like, who hasn't talked or whatever. And then they'll, like, call on people to finally make their comment. And so if you have a comment, it might not actually get made until like 20 minutes after you wanted to make the comment, and it's like not relevant to the conversation.
Yeah, it sounds worse.
It sucks. Yeah.
Wait, so there's like there's a moderator who's just reading the chat.
It's like whoever kind of has the floor sort of becomes the moderator, but also I think there's usually somebody whose job it is to kind of pay attention to the chat.
That sounds like something that a DSA group would come up with.
Right? Yeah, it's basically that.
Because it seems equitable, but also makes no sense.
It's equitable, but completely inefficient. Yeah.
There are so many good quotes about like the problems with socialist meetings. Like
I was thinking about it with Life of Brian. There's the Judean People's Front.
Judean People's Front.
All right. There's 3 minutes of banter for you all since you lost the whole.
You're welcome. There's your parasocial relationship.
Yeah.
Just take friends. It. All right. Here we go. In 3, 2, 1. And welcome to episode 413 of Cinematary. I'm your host, Zach Dennis, and I'm here with
Michael O'Malley
and Andrew Swafford.
In today's episode, we're going to be doing a rapid fire, what we've watched this week in part 1. Rapid fire.
Pew, pew, pew.
And then part 2, we're going to continue our Young Critics Watch Old Movies series from 1958's Elevator to the Gallows, which sounds much more dour than it really is.
There is an elevator that seems like it's going to go to the gallows at one point.
But it sounds like, it's going to be a bad time. It's not really that bad of a time.
It's very fun.
It's a good time, I would go so far as to say.
I laughed a lot.
Oh, yeah.
It's very funny.
It's a super funny movie. Anyway, that's part 2 nonsense. We'll get to that later.
Spoilers.
All right, we're going to start our rapid fire part 1 with Andrew. You have 2 movies you're tossing at us.
I do. I'm going to limit myself to 5 minutes per movie. So let me get my timer.
When I start doing this, that means time's up.
Okay. Well, I still need to be able to time myself here. Timer on. First movie we're talking about is Event Horizon, the Paul Anderson movie, which I had never seen before. Last night we threw a space party. Me and Jesse did at our house, and for the first part of the space party, we had 2001 playing in the background, and then at a certain point, we decided we wanted to watch Event Horizon. Super good. Super scary movie. Like, I was not prepared for how intense and scary this movie was going to get. Even though I had heard people say that, I guess I had not taken them as seriously as I should have when the people told me this was a very scary movie. It stars Sam Neill and Lawrence Fishburne. It's kind of like a 2001 sort of alien-ish thing where we're on a big like star freighter, like way out in space. and they are this band of astronaut scientists who have been sent to go investigate a ship that once went missing, potentially in a black hole, and it comes back all of a sudden. We don't really know where it went. So these guys go out there to investigate. And spoilers, you've probably heard this about the movie if you've heard about Event Horizon at all. The ship went through a portal to hell, and it came back and took some of hell with it. So whenever Sam Neill and Lawrence Fishburne enter the other ship, they have to experience like actual eternal torment, which is a thing that I really haven't seen on screen all that much. You know, there's a lot of demon movies, there's a lot of like Christian flavored horror movies, but there aren't a lot that actually capture that like kind of, what's the guy's name? Hieronymus Bosch, the painter who like paints the like big murals of like lots of people being tortured or lots of people fucking or something like that. Like you see stuff like that, like flashes of it in this movie. And apparently it was originally NC-17 and they had to like cut it down and like splice some of that stuff together in sort of like this Stan Brakhage like avant-garde way at points.
Do we have access to that earlier version? Because I would be interested in that.
I would love to watch the earlier version, but I have no idea.
My take on Event Horizon is it's too tame.
Really?
It's too tame.
Oh man, that was not my experience with it. Another thing though that I wanted to point out about it before this rapid fire recommendation runs out is that one way in which it deals with like Christian mythology differently than other movies like The Exorcist or Rosemary's Baby or whatever does is that they actually pay attention to the way that angels and other celestial beings are described in the Bible, which are usually like these kind of nonsensical, almost cosmic horror descriptions of like a wheel inside a wheel and stuff like that. And you see Satan in this movie, but he is not a big red giant with horns and a tail or like goat hooves or anything. He's like this weird spinning orb with spikes around him who never speaks. So that's really cool. Also, they kind of conceptualize hell as like a physical place you can go to, kind of like the ancient Greeks and Romans and other cultures thought of it as. And there's even kind of like a purgatory state that you have to go through in order to get there. But the people on the ship don't even know they're in the purgatory state until they're quite a ways into the hell part of it. So like really original like concept and really like strong execution. All the production design and special effects look really good here, except for a couple of shoddy like CGI things here and there. Sam Neill goes sicko mode in this movie. It's kind of like a in the mouth of madness sort of performance from him. Loved it. Thought it was awesome. One of the best cosmic horror movies I've ever seen, I gotta say. I have 45 seconds left. If Michael, you want to chime in about Event Horizon.
It's good. I hadn't seen it in quite a while, like maybe like 8 or 9 years, and I only watched the first half of it last night because I got tired and went home. But I enjoyed it. It's also like, for as like gruesome as it is, like the environment that we watched it in, which like, you know, lots of like drunken high people like heckling the screen, was also like very enjoyable as well. Like it's a movie that works on both wavelengths, right? If you want to take it seriously, yes. It can be spooky, but if you want to be kind of like silly about it, it is a Paul W.S. Anderson movie made in the 90s with like a lot of the kind of like silliness that you might associate with that.
And it has all the cool Paul W.S. Anderson like architecture, like the single point perspective thing that people may have seen if they've ever seen Nadine's Fandor video essay about Paul W.S. Anderson, worth Googling if you have not. But anyways, I will stop talking about Event Horizon, which is, again, a movie I recommend. But we were going to talk about also An Unmarried Woman. This is a very different kind of movie from a very different Paul. This movie is by Paul Mazurski, who I've only seen one other movie by. One of my favorite movies, actually, Bob and Carol and Ted and Alice. Jesse and I talked about this on the podcast about 2 years ago, maybe. And that movie and An Unmarried Woman both have a lot in common in terms of just both being these big social realism movies that consist almost entirely of people who are in relationships with one another, sitting in rooms talking about their relationship, or in some cases, like being in therapy and talking to their therapist about their relationships. And I know that that's not necessarily like untrod ground in the world of like cinema, or especially art house cinema, because you got people like John Cassavetes or Ingmar Bergman or people like that. In my view, I think that Paul Mazurski movies, like the conversations play out in a way that feels much more believable than some of those other filmmakers who do their own kind of like heightened versions of like conversational movies. One of the reasons why I really like the way that he handles them is that he films them in a way that similar to a thing that I talked about in my video essay about slow cinema, where in slow cinema, usually when you're getting like a conversation scene where you don't necessarily need a lot of camera movement, you just need to kind of see the people who are talking. The director just sort of puts the camera in the right spot and lets them have the full conversation without editing. Paul Mazurski does that a lot. He also allows the scenes to play out for a very long time, like much longer than most movies do. So the conversations end up going in different places. Like they kind of become exploratory and expansive in ways that conversations are usually don't in other movies, because they're more like focused on conveying some sort of plot information or moving us along from point A to point B. But anyways, I should probably also talk about what this movie's about. An Unmarried Woman came out in 1978. It is about this very wealthy Manhattan woman. She works
married?
in like, she is at the beginning of the movie. She isn't at the end of the movie. She works at like an art gallery. She's an art curator. And her husband is just kind of like a businessman guy, and she doesn't really have a ton in common with him. And they also fight a lot, but she does love him, and she has this shared history with him. And there's this kind of complex, nuanced, somewhat tender, if tense relationship between them. And for the first like 30, 45 minutes of the movie, you're just kind of getting a sense of what normal is like in their relationship. They also have a daughter who's like very intelligent and precocious, and like is familiar with like second wave feminism in a way that her mom probably wasn't when she was her age. But about 30, 45 minutes into the movie, the bomb gets dropped that the husband has fallen in love with someone else, and he has actually been in a relationship with this someone else for over a year. But he tries to pitch it as like, well, this is just me kind of being true to myself, being true to my feelings, which is kind of what Bob and Carol and Ted and Alice is. That's a polyamorous affirming movie. And like that opens with somebody confessing to adultery and the other person kind of being okay with it. In this case, it's a much bigger betrayal. And I think that the other character who's receiving this news is kind of in a much different like mental space to receive that news. And so we kind of see this relationship fall apart in a way that it doesn't in Bob and Carol. And then the rest of the movie is just her kind of like dealing with the emotional aftermath of divorce and trying to be a single parent and going on dates with various guys. It kind of has a their eyes are watching God sort of quality to it, where you kind of see her date all these different guys, and you're sort of being invited to kind of compare and contrast the positive and negative qualities of all these men. And it ultimately comes down on sort of an ambiguous note where you don't necessarily know if she's going to end up with any of these dudes. But you kind of get a sense of her being in sort of the first part of this next act of her life. And we're getting this snapshot of it. And I thought it was a really beautiful movie. I thought all the acting was great. Paul Mazurski casts a lot of people who aren't particularly like big names. They kind of feel like real normal people. And yeah, this was another big recommendation for me, Unmarried Woman. It is a recent Criterion movie, I believe. I may go double dip in the Criterion sale and get me a copy of this one. Yeah.
Shout out to the Criterion sale.
Shout out to the Criterion sale.
All right, Michael, you're up. You got 3.
I got 3. So I also got my phone set up with the timer so I can, keep myself accountable. But anyway, so my 3 movies, well, I'll name them one at a time. The first one that I want to talk about is called The Bad Guys, which was in theaters a month or two ago, maybe. It's out on DVD now, which is how I saw it. This is the newest DreamWorks animation feature, and it's about these group of animals described simply as the bad guys. Like everyone just sees them and they think, oh, it's the bad guys. And so it's like a snake voiced by Mark Maron. It's a wolf who is, actually Mark Maron is really good at the snake. I didn't even recognize him as Mark Maron. He just sounds like a cartoon voice, which I think is like a great thing. That's like a good voice actor, right?
He wasn't acting. He wasn't like asking the other cartoon characters. So who are your guys? Who are your guys?
When I was growing up in the 70s, man, I was reading Jack Kerouac and although the movie does open up on like a long conversation between the snake voiced by Mark Maron and then the big bad wolf, who is like briefly alluded to as being like the Red Riding Hood, Little Bad Wolf, but there's like no connection at all otherwise in the movie. They're having like a long conversation about what kind of animals they like to eat, and the snake really likes to eat guinea pigs. They're just succulents, apparently. But anyway, it's about this group, and there's like a shark in there too. It's just all these like conventionally threatening animals, and they get caught doing bad things because they're like a crime syndicate basically, and they get caught doing bad things because they're bad guys. And then this guy says, it's okay, I can rehabilitate them. And so they decide we're going to pretend to be rehabilitated so then we can get an opportunity to do more bad things, but without the scrutiny that we had before. And like the plot is kind of fine. Like it's like a heist movie, and it's not, it's just kind of like meat and potatoes, like heist movie. Like it's okay. But what I really liked about this is the animation is great. And I think it's interesting if you look at like the history of computer animation in America, and you kind of have the big three historically, although there's a few others that are significant. You have like Pixar, then you have Disney, which is now like kind of like intertwined with Pixar, and then you have DreamWorks, and all these are like the three that have pushed CG animation. And the interesting thing about DreamWorks the whole time through is DreamWorks was always doing weird shit. And early on, that means that their movies looked ugly as crap, right? Like so many early DreamWorks, like Ants or Shrek or whatever, they just look strange and gross. And that was kind of interesting in contrast to something like Pixar, which was never trying to do something like that. But as time has gone on, and I'm not sure if this is that they have better art direction or the technology has changed enough that they can do this, like DreamWorks has become like a really interesting visual studio. And I've talked about this before, but like things like the Trolls movies, or the Captain Underpants, or the Boss Baby, like all of these movies, or the Kung Fu Panda, all of these movies are doing really interesting things that are pushing computer animation away from this kind of like Pixar-looking realism. And this movie is a really interesting example of that. And the movie is, if it were a video game, you would call it cel shaded. I don't know if that's like the term you would use for just like straight up animation, but it's made to look like it does this by mixing actual cel animation with 3D animation. It's made to look like 2D, like it's like stuff is made to look 2D, not like Paper Mario or something, but as if it were drawn almost. And it looks really cool. My thought always with this, and I've said this before, is I don't know why we wasted this much time with computer animation just so we can eventually loop back around to cartoony animation when we already had that like really slick by the end of the 90s. Like if you look at what DreamWorks was doing with like The Road to El Dorado or something like that, with their drawn like 2D animation, that looked really good, or Prince of Egypt. And now they've kind of looped back around to something that is like that, except with like 3D elements more so. But it looks really cool. So The Bad Guys, pretty good. Looks really cool. All right. I had 7 seconds to spare on that one, so I'm doing pretty good.
Just there and breathe,
Next up, Next up is Fire Island, which I watched on Hulu. I don't know if this is a Hulu original or not, but
it is.
It is okay.
Can I say, every time I see this movie on Letterboxd, I think it's one of the Fire Festival documentaries.
That's what I thought at first too, which is why I avoided it, because I had watched one of those and I was like, "Oh, that was okay. I think I know everything I need to know about that."
Yeah.
But no, this is when I actually read into what it is, I was instantly intrigued. This is an adaptation of Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, set in contemporary America, at a kind of seems like a resorty kind of area called Fire Island, which, me being a straight man from Tennessee, I have no window into the subculture, but this is apparently like a kind of mecca for gay men from New York to go on vacation, according to the movie at least, and Wikipedia kind of like halfway backs it up. So that's kind of the milieu. Is that
sources?
Yeah, right. So in the movie, this is Pride and Prejudice, except it's a bunch of kind of rich-ish gay men from New York on vacation on Fire Island, and it is pretty interesting. Like, it begins with it's got a voiceover the whole time through that I think is kind of annoying, because it does that thing where you see something happen and the voiceover explains what just happened. So that's like a negative. But a positive is it starts with, the famous quote from the beginning of Pride and Prejudice, which is, it is a truth universally acknowledged that a woman in possession of property will be, I'm misquoting it, but basically, like, if you are a woman of means, you need to marry off, right? And it begins by saying, the narrator reads that off and then says, but actually, and then revises it to describe like different elements of class and power dynamics within like the gay New York scene, which is really interesting. And throughout the movie, they do this where they take the power dynamics and the like economic insecurities of the Pride and Prejudice story and don't really change what they are on paper, but by making them about gay men in relationships and stuff, it kind of transforms them in an interesting way. And so I thought that was good. The movie itself is fine. It's a little bit of a mixed bag for me. Like I said, the voiceover was kind of irritating to me. Also, the guy his name's not Mr. Darcy, but the guy who is playing the Mr. Darcy role, Mr. Darcy's like a weird character because he's supposed to be kind of like smoldery and sexy, but he's also supposed to be really pouty and not very pleasant. And they got the like pouty and unpleasant part of Mr. Darcy right, but like he didn't seem I didn't like him, and I didn't think the actor was very good who was playing him. And I can't remember what the actor's name is. I didn't recognize him. So like there's like some stuff that I don't think like entirely works in this movie, but there's other stuff that really do. For example, if you've read Pride and Prejudice or seen one of the movie adaptations, you know that like a big part of that story is that the Bennets, the central family, only have girls as daughters, right? And so because of the weird elements of like the gentry in England at the time, this means that the family will lose their property if they don't get married off, right? And so there's a lot of like tension about like who's going to marry off their daughters. And in this movie, there is kind of like a found family of these men who all come in vacation at the same house on Fire Island every time, and they find out this time that the woman who owns the house is going to lose the house because she's come into financial trouble, and so there becomes like a tension to find another family or like another group that they can then return to Fire Island with the next year if they've like entered into a relationship with this person. And it's not quite that prosaic. I'm kind of simplifying it a little bit. But anyway, I think it's good. It's a flawed movie, but like if you're interested in seeing Pride and Prejudice updated in interesting ways, I would recommend it. So, not like a ringing endorsement, but if that sounds intriguing to you, I think it'll be a fun movie to watch. Okay. 12 seconds to spare on that one.
Nice.
Yeah, you can't catch me. The last one I'm going to
Trying to
talk
catch
about,
you.
the time is
Oh.
trying to catch me. Old.
All right, there we wasted
Yeah.
12 seconds.
Yeah, there's my 12 seconds.
Yeah.
So the third and final movie I'm going to talk about is also a Hulu original, and it is called Good Luck to You, Leo Grande. And of all the movies I'm talking about today, this is my favorite of the three. And it is about this woman played by Emma Thompson, who's like really excellent in this movie. Like Emma Thompson's a really good actress, regardless, but
Yeah, she's usually good all the time. She's great.
she's usually good all the time, but this is like an exceptionally good role of hers. But so she is a woman who is a widow. Her husband of many years has died, and she used to be a school teacher, and she's now retired. And so she's looking at, kind of the latter years of her life. I don't know how old Emma Thompson is, but in this movie, she's not like at the end of her life, of course, but she is also at the point in which like the first and kind of primary stage of her life in which she was married and had a career has ended. And she's reflecting back over her life, and she comes to the realization that she's unsatisfied with how her life has played out, in part because she has been someone who kind of bought into all the rules about like sexual conformity and modesty and like these kind of like patriarchal norms surrounding like womanhood and female sexuality. And she's come out unsatisfied. I've lived that decades. I'm unsatisfied. And so the movie begins with her having hired this sex worker who goes by the name Leo Grande. And this is going to be kind of her liberatory experience, is to have sex with this guy. And the movie is structured almost like a play where there's 4 discrete scenes. Each is one of the times that she meets with this sex worker. And in each scene, she has like a sexual experience that she wants to have. And they will go through attempting to begin that, but it will like kind of unearth like traumas and insecurities that she has, and they will like talk about them. And that sounds kind of prosaic how I've mentioned it, and it is a little schematic at times, where there's a format. But I thought that this was actually really good, and me being a man in my 30s, I know all about what it's like to be a woman with regrets in my late life. And as that, I can say that this reflects that experience very well. But like all joking aside, like it scans to me as something that is fairly nuanced and insightful about that perspective and that experience. And it is, Emma Thompson's character in particular is really interesting because you see the ways in which she's working through this kind of internalized misogyny that she has had, where on the one, like she'll be talking about how she feels restricted and how like her experiences with her husband were kind of unsatisfying sexually and stuff like that. But then she'll start talking about like girls these days have like their skirts are too short, and I don't really know, and she'll kind of regurgitate stuff and then have to like process that about like, oh, that's what I was thinking. At one point in the movie, she runs into a former student of hers in the lobby of the hotel where she's meeting the sex worker, and they talk, and the student reminds her of this one time that she had like gotten on to the girls in the class about how they were dressing. And Emma Thompson's character has to kind of think over that and think over, okay, why did I think those things? And I don't know. It's again, I'm describing this as kind of like something like formulaic and prosaic and therapeutic in a kind of boring way, but I didn't find this movie boring at all. I think it's like really interesting, and like I said, Emma Thompson's really great. The guy who's playing Leo Grande is also good, although his character is kind of underdeveloped. I think they kind of give him a little bit of plot later on and some tensions of his own, but I think like the main show here is Emma Thompson, and she's really good. She really embodies with her performance just the nuances of someone sorting through all this. And just because you want to be liberated isn't the same thing as actually being liberated. You actually have to work through a lot of stuff that you've internalized. And I thought it was good and interesting. So it's good.
It's on Hulu.
It's on Hulu. So if you go to Hulu, you can choose between that and Fire Island.
And the title and the poster of this movie on Letterboxd really makes it seem like a made-for-Hulu movie that I don't want to watch. But your description sounds like a good movie.
Yeah, the filmmaking is not very flashy. Like I said, it's structured almost like a play, and it is not filmed like a play, but it is also not filmed with a lot of like visual cinematic ambition in mind. You know, it was mostly in a single room. There's mostly shot reverse shot with these conversations.
Right.
Cool. All right, I'm gonna bring us home with my one movie.
Go Zach.
Let's do it.
So I saw Official Competition, which I guess came out at TIFF last year. I don't remember seeing it. But just recently played at the Venice Film Festival and is making the rounds in theaters. It seems like a movie that'll be one of the foreign film options on Hulu pretty soon also. But this one stars Antonio Banderas and Penelope Cruz, but it's not a Almodovar film. Instead, it is so the plot of the movie is there's this billionaire who you at the beginning of the movie, he's standing there like looking out onto the city, and he's like, I've turned 80 years old and I've brought nothing to the world. And so then his little assistant's like, well, what would you like to do? And he's like, I'd like to build a bridge and then donate it to the state and then make them name the bridge after me. And he's like, okay. And then he's like, no, wait, I also want to make a movie. He was like, that's what you want to do to like give back to the world? He's like, yes, that's good. That'll give back to the world, you know? And so they buy like this book, and he hires this filmmaker who's played by Penelope Cruz, who is this kind of very eccentric, well-known, well-regarded filmmaker. And the plot of the movie is you have these two brothers, one who's kind of older, a little bit older, who's played by Oscar Martinez, and then the somewhat younger brother who is played by Antonio Banderas. And in the characters in the movie, Oscar Martinez's character, he's like very like method acting, the acting process. You know, acting is it's not only a job, it's a calling and an art form, and we should treat it as such. And then you have Antonio Banderas, who is pretty much like a Hollywood star. And so the movie is like, it's a satire of the movie industry. It's constantly just kind of like all of these personalities are pronounced to like the 1,000th degree, that, you know, it's absurd and silly, but like there's something really entertaining about just like how like it kind of just has the line and it goes like 6 steps over it, just because it's just like at one point Penelope Cruz, they like walk outside, there's this giant boulder that this crane is holding, and she's like, I want you to act the scene where you're in the courtroom while the boulder is above you, so that you can feel the tension of the scene. And so they're like sitting there under the boulder, and like Antonio Banderas is like really stiff, like trying to read the lines, but he keeps like looking up at this like 5-ton boulder above him. And then something happens that's very funny with the boulder that I don't want to. You have to kind of watch the movie to get into it, but it's a lot of that kind of stuff where you're never watching them film the movie, you're watching them rehearse the scenes of the movie, and she's making them do just these like insane things to go along with just going through the movie as like a rehearsal. Like at one point they're like destroying awards. Like it's a really absurd movie. I really enjoyed it because it constantly is just kind of insane. You also really have like this whole thing between the Oscar Martinez character and the Banderas character, where they're like, because they're these polar opposites, you know, one is very like into the craft of acting, and one is just like, yeah, I'm like getting my paycheck and doing stuff. They're constantly like competing with one another, and like you get to this one point in the movie where they get into an acting challenge against one another. And so like there's this really pivotal moment where Antonio Banderas' character gives like this really long emotional monologue, and like everybody's really emotional about it, and like it like kind of like halts everything for a day. And then you have the other guy who then does the same thing in a different fashion because they're like trying to compete with who will believe that this thing that I'm telling everybody is real and can like do like who can act the best. And so they're like doing these things that completely like disrupting the whole emotional state of the production to like one up one another because they're trying to compete. It's a really silly movie. I was thoroughly entertained the entire time.
It sounds almost like a Christopher Guest sort of thing.
It is. It's like Christopher Guest with like a little slice of like it's a little punchier than a Christopher Guest movie because it's also like it kind of has like a cut to it that Christopher Guest movies are satirizing stuff but also, you know, pretty soft with it.
Yeah.
This one is a lot it bites a little bit more. And then like for whatever reason it has these like little interludes where Penelope Cruz, like when one of the interludes she's like hooked up or something with one of the female stars, and like you don't see them having sex, but like she's like the female star is standing in front of Penelope Cruz and she's like doing this TikTok dance, and they never say anything. She's just doing the TikTok dance, and Penelope Cruz is like smoking a cigarette, like watching her, and then it just cuts to another scene, and you're like, what the fuck was that? And then it cuts to another interlude later in the movie where like Penelope Cruz is trying to like figure out for herself how to floss, and so she's like sitting there like doing this. And then she's like, she's like the whole time she's like, it's like she's straining to like make it like to do the floss thing. It's just so fucking crazy. No, but I really liked it. I think Banderas is especially really good because he like really leans into being like the asshole Hollywood star and just kind of has fun with it. The other guy is good too. Like you'll go to his house and he like has this study with all of these like very analog devices, and he has like an orange cat that he just kind of sits there and like while he's listening to his like record, and his wife is like this children's like he's also really funny because he's just like over the top, like this is what an intellectual pretentious person is like, and he like just kind of makes fun of that at the same time. So it's really good. I recommend if it's playing near you or it pops up on streaming to check out Official Competition because it's really funny. And I think it kind of throws you for a loop, especially like in the back end of the movie. It just starts doing stuff that you're just like, what the fuck is going on? But it's always just it's constantly like this pissing contest between these two guys, which I like. Nonsense and pissing contests.
Have you ever seen the movie Chevalier? I think is what it's called. Is a Greek movie by a collaborator of Yorgos Lanthimos about like a bunch of dudes on a ship, just like who keep making up competitions for them to compete with one another in, including actual like pissing and dick measuring contests. I know. So maybe worth a watch. I don't know.
I'm in the genre of dick measuring contests.
Yeah.
I've watched too much Jackass. That's what happens. All right. I think we did pretty good. Yeah. 35 minutes.
That was a shorter part one for us, you know?
Yeah.
We've been going longer.
Well, we're going to head into a break, and then we'll be back talking about Elevator to the Gallows after this.
That's right. Let's go swap out the beverage. One sec.
So, Michael, I spent the morning just finding really articulated negative reviews of Everything Everywhere All at Once.
I noticed that on letterbox.
Andrew, I was telling Michael, I spent this morning for whatever reason, I just found this deluge of very articulate but negative reviews of Everything Everywhere All at Once.
Yeah.
They were really good though. They were very very well thought out.
The one that was talking about like all the Asian stereotypes in the movie is interesting to me. Because like I'm sure that an Asian person would point to, or an Asian person who likes the movie would point to the fact that one of the directors is Asian. Like, hey, he's just trying to convey, things about his own culture that he's experienced. But of course, the reviewer is too. So there's kind of multiple ways to look at that.
Right. It's one of those movies where I probably will never watch this movie again unless someone asks me. And I thought it was okay, as I articulated, I think, on the podcast.
Yeah.
But it's one of those movies where both the detractors and the supporters, I read a review by a positive review that's well written, and I'm like, yeah, I can see that.
Yeah.
And then I read a well articulated negative review about it, and I'm like, yeah, I can see that too. It's one of those, I don't know. It's one of those where I didn't feel that strongly about the movie.
You gotta trust your gut. Like, what did you feel while you were sitting and watching it? I mostly felt bored and annoyed after a certain point.
Yeah, and I liked it, and I don't feel like I like it or dislike it anymore after all of this. But sometimes like a consensus builds around a movie that
it does.
The consensus is kind of and and like the consensus will be something that I either am like fully like, yes, I agree with this consensus, or sometimes it'll be like, yeah, I don't really. People are kind of off on this one. But this is one of those rare movies where there's an even split in my head of there's very reasonable people who have very reasonable pans of this movie, and there are very reasonable people who have very reasonable positive reviews of this movie, and that's kind of an interesting.
I don't know. Some of the ones that I read this morning, I think, kind of also cut through some of the points that are being made in positive reviews, because like the one kind of made a point that like we're plotting this for being like this kind of familial relationship movie, but it's also like they were also complaining that every like Asian diaspora movie has to be about like the kid and the mom not being able to get along. And
I also thought it was a great point to compare it to Turning Red. Which the reviewer is like way better than Everything Everywhere.
Well, it was funny. Like among those reviews that you named, I think one review compared it to Turning Red as both of these as being tiresome examples of the same stereotype, and then the other one said Turning Red is the better movie, which I thought was funny.
I think it's like part of it is Everything Everywhere is trying to do like a million styles at once, and like that's the gimmick. But with Turning Red, like it hones this very particular type of like Pixar meets 90s anime sort of aesthetic and energy that like I just think is really winning.
I don't need to watch Everything Everywhere again because I think I'll just go on a thing. But I thought, but I think that I think that they made good points that I felt I just couldn't articulate, that like we're getting to this point with especially Asian diaspora movies that we've gotten to already with African diaspora movies, where it's just like we're kind of just running the same thing over and over again. You're like, at some point we have to kind of challenge ourselves above the one. Like what was like the one review was like, if we just keep reinforcing the stereotype about the tiger mom stereotype, that then we're just kind of feeding into, like we're giving that stereotype, like like we're giving that energy when there's so many other different experiences we should be exploring, other than just this, like the mom and the kid can't get along. Like she's like, that's probably definitely an experience for a lot of Asian people, but at the same time that's not the only experience. Like we're limiting ourselves, and that's kind of almost bad in its own respect.
And I wonder if you're using the stereotype as sort of like a shortcut to put an emotional core in the story. Because when I was watching it, I felt like for the first hour or so, I felt like I was just watching jokes. And then it pivots to like, oh no, this is actually a very serious movie about family relationships. And I wonder if like the actual goal of making the movie was to do the like silly maximalist jokes. And they kind of had to retrofit something else in there to make it work as a movie. I don't know.
No, it's just they were good. It was good writing on it, because I'm like, I think it's something that I felt also with like a lot of TV shows and movies that are geared toward Black audiences, that it becomes very like, it's like at some point it's not really a nuanced. It's not really. It's kind of the same thing over and over again. You're like, but like if we're just going to do the same thing over and over again, then are we really like making progress, in that kind of culture, or are we just making the same thing over again and going, we're progressive and like we're really, saying something that hasn't been said before, and you're like, no, like we've said it 15 times at this point, like we need to move on.
Right.
I think maybe, if you look at, these aren't always like the best positive reviews of the movie, but like some of the positive reviews of the movie are definitely from people who have not seen a lot of the other cultural reference points for like Asian film. And so perhaps like one of the reasons why people keep resonating with these stories is that it's not yet like become like the media trope, because, if this is like your first like whatever, like non-superhero adult movie that you're watching, then it's going to seem really fresh. And then, you'll eventually get, I don't know. So like, I think back to like, I don't know, like, a lot of, like, if you talk about like a lot of the like, African-American like media from like the 90s, like a lot of those like like black sitcoms and that sort of stuff, like they're very tropey, in the same way that all sitcoms are, but they have their specifically black tropes and stuff like that too. But when people look back at them now, I think that there is like an understanding of, okay, like, yeah, this was the era, this was like the tropes that they were working toward, but here's the kind of interesting or specific thing about that within that trope that we could latch on to. It's like, yeah, it's another black sitcom, blah, 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 blah. But, and then there's the thing. And I wonder if like that will be true of this kind of like wave of kind of like Asian American movies where, we'll come to recognize it as like a kind of like, okay, yeah, like this is a wave and a subgenre of thing. And so if we go into them recognizing that, like, yes, they are all playing into the same trope, like people will kind of attach to them in different ways. The same way that people like approach rom-coms and stuff, which in the moment, like when all those rom-coms were coming out in like mid 2000s or whatever, it was suffocating.
It was.
But now when we're no longer in that moment of suffocation, we can go back and kind of like acknowledge that, like, okay, yeah, there's a lot of tiresome stuff being repeated throughout these movies, but there's also kind of unique, interesting flair or winsomeness to some of these too.
I'm welcome to admit that I don't think Everything Everywhere is one of those. I would be more on the Turning Red is actually the better example.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I like Turning Red too. But I guess what I'm saying is, I'll be interested to see like when the people who are like whatever 17 and this is blowing their minds like grow up and realize the broader spectrum of movies that kind of fit these archetypes. How do people feel about it then?
Yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of stupid movie viewers. Sorry, YouTube people.
I like that when we first talked about Everything Everywhere on the podcast, it was this group of 3 people, and now we just gave the YouTube viewers just a bonus second run.
The circle, yeah.
I'm just saying, there's some good. There's a bunch of really good letterbox reviews of the movie that I think would be worth people's time, whether you liked it or not, because I think they make some very valid points.
They do,
and it's it brings up a lot of good ideas.
Let's do part 2.
Let's do it.
All right. Here we go. In 3, 2, 1. And we're back with part 2 of episode 413 of Cinematary. In this part, we're going to continue our Young Critics Watch Old Movies series with 1958's Elevator to the Gallows. Directed by Louis Malle from a script by Malle and Roger Namir. The film stars Jeanne Moreau, Maurice Ronet, Georges Pajoli, Yori Burton, and Jean Wall. That's funny, Jean Wall. Florence, he's a basketball player named John Wall. Florence is married to the wealthy arms dealer Simon Caralla, but is carrying on a torrid affair with one of her husband's employees, Julian. Julian daringly climbs into Simon's office on it just as a rope. It's a grappling hook, baby. Kills him and leaves unnoticed. Malle adapted the stylistic and thematic motifs of classic American film noir to a French context, while at the same time introducing new cinematic and storytelling innovations that would influence others. This, combined with the film's modern settings, its iconic new generation of actors, and its cutting-edge jazz score, have led many to cite the film as the first French New Wave film. Malle cast Moreau after seeing her in the Paris stage production of Tennessee Williams' Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. She had already been in a number of films, but her role in this film is often considered her breakthrough. Malle filmed her without the use of heavy makeup and extreme lighting that previous directors had demanded. Scenes of Moreau wandering down the Champs-Élysées at night were shot on fast film from a baby carriage using only available light from the street and shop windows. A devoted fan since his early teens, Malle was at the time listening to a lot of Miles Davis. He even included a Miles Davis record sleeve in the room of the teenage girl Veronica for a short engagement. Then by coincidence, while he was editing the film, Davis came to Paris to play in a club through his friend, the writer and musician Boris Vian, who was then the director of the jazz department at the Philips Record Company. Malle arranged to meet with Davis to discuss his composing the soundtrack for the film. At first, the musician was reluctant because he didn't have his usual musicians with him, but Malle managed to convince him. He showed Davis the film twice, and they agreed on the parts where they felt music was needed. Taking advantage of the one night of his one night off Davis had from the club where he was performing, Malle rented a sound studio in Paris. Here, Davis, drummer Kenny Clark, and 3 French session players worked from 10 at night until 5 the next morning, improvising the music while watching each scene of the film loop around, eventually recording the whole score in one night. I couldn't find any contemporary to 1958 reviews of the film, but there was one, Ebert in 2005, when the movie got a re-release in theaters. He observed that Moreau's face when Florence is pondering Julian's whereabouts, quote, is often illuminated only by the lights of the cafes and shops that she passes. At a time when actresses were lit and photographed with care, these scenes had a shock value and influenced many films to come. He further argued that Louis and Veronique were a precursor to the young couple in Jean-Luc Godard's Breathless from 1960. Yeah, so on that note, let's talk a little bit about Elevator to the Gallows. I'm going to start it with you, Michael, since I believe this was your pick for Young Critics for this decade.
It was, yeah. And I knew nothing about this movie except that it had a Miles Davis score. And so I, being a Miles Davis fan, thought, I want to see the French movie with the Miles Davis score. And I have now, and it was good. And I was surprised that the reason I thought it was good was not simply because of the Miles Davis score, which, by the way, is very spare. There's less than half an hour of Miles Davis music in this movie.
He made it in one night, so I give him credit.
He's got records later on that are like 90 minutes that he made in one night. So, I guess everyone grows up, right? Anyway, the Miles Davis music is very good, and we can maybe talk about that later on. But what I liked about this movie that I wasn't expecting was that it is funny, and it strikes me as it's. As I was watching it, I was thinking, this feels like a movie that Joel and Ethan Coen love, and I don't know if that's the case, but
they have to love this movie.
It plays out exactly like you would imagine, like a Coen Brothers movie. So, like, the guy goes and murders his boss. And then
he does it because the boss's wife pays him to, which is like a Fargo thing.
Yeah. The boss's wife pays him to. And as he's leaving, he notices that he's made one mistake, which is that he's left he left
the grappling hook.
He left the grappling hook. And so he goes, and then in trying to clean up this one mistake, he gets stuck in an elevator. And that throws off the whole plan. And then
he also crucially leaves the keys in his car while his car is running. Like, how like
just turn off the car.
Stupid criminal is this guy?
Yeah, so like this is like a classic Coen Brothers, like, dude gets in over his head because he tries to commit a crime and then goofs it up, and then things spiral out of control. And he spends 2/3 of this movie trapped in that elevator, and we see him try to escape the elevator unsuccessfully several times.
Yep.
And in the end, he just sits in there smoking cigarettes. But then when he finally escapes, he has to go clean up the cigarettes.
He's sitting there smoking cigarettes and like drawing on like a piece of paper in a way that looks like what a possessed kid in a horror movie has like put in their journal.
Yeah, and I mean it eventually spirals out so that like some bad stuff goes down, as it does if you've seen Fargo or whatever. But anyway, I had heard, this is a kind of proto-French New Wave film, and I guess from that I was expecting something different. I was expecting it to be fairly straight-faced, even though I know that not all French New Wave films are serious. In fact, Breathless is very playful and stuff like that. But I was not prepared for this to be like a comedy of errors for half of it, and I really liked it.
I was surprised at how straightforward it was in terms of the filmmaking compared to some of the later French New Wave movies. Like Breathless, you're right, is playful, and part of the playfulness is like the weird editing stuff they do. And Agnes Varda does the same thing, like Cleo from 9 to 7 and La Pointe Court and movies like that. But this mostly like plays out like it looks like a very straight crime movie, but just the events that you're watching are kind of ludicrous. Which is interesting, like compared to that Miles Davis score, which is kind of serious and sultry. And Michael, you were talking to me last night about how it feels like the shtick that people do when they're making fun of like the smoky noir, where the guy is sitting in his detective office and you're hearing like saxophone playing and stuff like that. And I don't know if this was like one of the inspirations for that to become popular, or if it was playing off of something.
Because I mean, a lot of those old film noirs don't have jazz scores; they have like classic Hollywood scores, and so I'm not sure where that trope came from. But it's in this.
It might be.
Maybe.
This is, I think, like both a very accessible noir and a very accessible French New Wave movie. If I was to teach a film studies class, which I've never gotten a chance to do, unfortunately, I would probably teach this as like the French New Wave movie we do, or like a French New Wave movie we do, because I could see students like really tracking with it in a way that I don't know if they would with something like Breathless or La Pointe Court or 400 Blows or something like that. Like those movies can be kind of dry in a way,
Well, and like specifically with Breathless and a lot of the Godard movies, before he gets real weird, those are much more complex in their relationship to the kind of classic Hollywood movies that they're inspired by. Whereas this is just a few clicks away from, like you mentioned, like it's clearly its own thing, but it's also much more clearly rooted in that sort of stuff. It's less ironic and detached than like Godard's like Breathless or some of those other ones he made in the 60s. And I think maybe that's why I responded to it so well, is that I was expecting it to be more detached and more like conceptual than it is. But it's really enjoyable just on its face, irrespective of its relationship to American genres. Like it, I don't know. Like a lot of those French New Wave dudes were film critics, and I have no idea what the background of Louis Malle is, but he doesn't strike me as having the same sort of like, I've seen all the movies and I'm now going to drolly riff on them sort of sensibilities that some of the like French New Wave films have. He seems to be approaching this much more from he seems like a fan.
He does. It seems like he's enjoying participating in this genre, right?
He does. I was surprised just how it feels like a very seamless movie. It just it very much like scoots along at a very like steady pace, and is, it gets a little bit it kind of slows a little bit down when you're in the part where the young couple is with the German couple at the motel, because they're just kind of hanging out and like drinking, and the guy and the young couple is just so irritable to be around.
The guy offers him champagne, and he basically says, like, I'm too much of a leftist to drink champagne. Like, have you realized the horrible things that are happening in the world? I can't drink champagne at this moment. I'm not a champagne socialist.
He's just like, "Wah!"
The whole like interaction between the German couple and this couple is really funny to me until it becomes like really tense and kind of like serious. But it's like very much.
All of a sudden it's like, well, the only thing there is to do is for us to kill ourselves, and he has we don't have a conversation about that at all. He's like,
but they're bad at it. Like that's another thing too. Like they like pay that off later in the movie where they like they've like attempted to overdose on sleeping pills, and then they wake up and they're like, oh shit.
Well, Jeanne Moreau's character walks in and they're just kind of like sitting there like, and like he's in the bathroom, and she's like, you idiots! Like he
they barely acknowledge her.
Yeah.
I would be like, who are you? How did you find us? What do you want?
No, there are a lot of the humor just because they're so stupid on their own, and then like the way that they interact with people, because he seems to hate every person who has ever lived on this earth. and like the German guy's like trying to start conversation, and like because they're pretending to be the guy who did the hit on the boss earlier, he's like talking to him about like his time in the service or whatever, and he's like, well, did you see any Germans, there? And he's just like, no, I didn't see any Germans. He's like, are you sure? What the war was? And he was just like, no, I didn't see it. And he's just like, oh, okay, well, that's weird.
Now you bring it up. Go ahead, Andrew. I was just going to bring up, I think the politics of this movie are kind of interesting because I don't know if you mentioned it before just now, but the guy who kills the boss is a veteran of a war. I don't know if is it definitely World War One?
It's it was the Indochina.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, they mentioned
war,
that. They mentioned that.
And Algiers.
Right, and so like that is like hovering over the movie the whole time. Like multiple people mention like the conflicts over that, and then like the beginning of the movie has the boss who, like we mentioned, is an arms dealer, like talking about his profits and stuff like that. And so there is something interesting going on. And I'm not sure if I can like put my finger on it, partially because this is not my forte, like this like part of world history. But there is like, at least like surface level, something interesting going on where, the veteran kills the arms dealer, who is of course like profited off of the trauma and death that he has experienced. And now he is an employee of this man. And also like his wife, like the arms dealer's wife is cheating on him with this guy, but then it all like goes awry. I don't know. Like did you guys have any thoughts about like what's going on with the politics?
I mean, I'm glad you brought it up. This was the same thing I was going to bring up too, because I remember there's a conversation that happens before the guy kills his boss, where they're kind of talking about the seriousness of business versus the seriousness of war. And I guess I wasn't necessarily thinking at the time. I didn't fully understand what this business was. Like, who is this boss? What is he getting rich off of? But knowing that he gets rich off of arms manufacturing kind of puts the whole thing in a slightly different light. I wonder if there's something going on here about like the evolving nature of colonialism, because France is very much like they were in there with like the colonial powers,
one of the big guys, one of the big ones
of the century previous. And like colonialism is still a thing, but it's not necessarily like military colonialism. In a lot of the cases, it's more like economic colonialism, like we're exploiting countries that have like sweatshop practices and stuff like that. And I don't know if the movie necessarily is that interested in like exploring that, but it is kind of there and like almost every character has some sort of connection to the recent military conflict as well. Would that be the boss, the guy who's stuck in the titular elevator to the gallows, or the anti-champagne socialist dude? So I don't know. Other thoughts about that?
I don't know. I mean, it is. I mean, the moment when this is all happening, like the 1950s, I mean, the 1950s are like, in terms of colonialism, like one of the turning points, right? That's when so many countries in Africa become liberated.
Mhm.
Like Algeria, like all that sort of stuff is really heating up, to my knowledge. And then there's stuff going on in Vietnam too, right? That like presages like the Viet Cong and like communist like revolution there, and then America's aggression toward that. And like I don't know, like I again like this is not my forte in terms of world history,
Yeah, me
but this seems like even if it strikes me as interesting, even if the movie itself wasn't intended as like a commentary on these things, but like simply by existing in this milieu,
yeah,
it like unavoidably comments on it, and it kind of strikes me as in the same way that this is maybe this movie is a little bit more intentioned on this than Elevator to the Gallows may perhaps, but it strikes me in like Burn After Reading, if we're bringing up the Coens, right? And that's another kind of movie in which like you have plots kind of like spiral out of control.
Mhm.
That movie came out in 2008.
Yeah.
And you could not have made a movie involving the US military and not have dealt with like some of those issues of surveillance or whatever, even if that movie itself is not like deeply interested in like, let's say, like the Iraq war or war in Afghanistan or like any of those like actual conflicts, but by simply existing as a plot involving like military and government at the time, it is going to feel adjacent to those things. And I wonder if a similar thing is happening here.
Yeah, I mean, Burn After Reading definitely has a feeling of like, there's a games critic who refers to, he has this term, the cock-up cascade, where like you do one thing badly in a video game and then like 10 more things like just kind of domino on top of that, where like the nature of like military conflicts now, and I guess always, but can just be like so insanely complicated that like a single person cannot wrap their head around like all the various angles at play. So I wonder if there's a similar thing going on with Elevator to the Gallows, where you can kind of read the events that are not about military conflict as being somewhat like secretly about military conflict, but I don't actually know what that reading would be.
It also seems kind of almost a little inherent vicey, where it's like there's kind of stuff happening in the background that it never like engages on like a direct level.
Yeah.
But the outside kind of stuff that's happening in the background is directly affecting the stuff like in the foreground, because it feels like there's a lot of socio-political ideas and emotions from this time period at play, but it never like outwardly engages with them outside of like these kind of side conversations between like Julian and the boss before he kills them, or this German couple and the young couple. So you kind of get a sense of where everybody's sitting at this period of time, but nobody ever really directly engages where like France is at in this moment.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's like an interesting thing. Like there's a lot of American counterculture media that is not directly about like the kind of like activist vanguard stuff, right? Like a lot of like the what we would consider like hippie music, or like kind of like the rock and roll kind of stuff. Like it is rarely like directly engaging with like the war in Vietnam, or whatever, any number of like civil rights movement, like any other, like there's a few like some of Bob Dylan's music, or like maybe a few scattered like Beatles songs, or like Creedence Clearwater Revival, or like, but for the most part, like what makes those part of the counterculture movement is them capturing the sense of alienation and disaffectedness that has been caused by those things. Like at least in America, there's a major rift in terms of what the American like government apparatus is doing, and how like the youth culture felt at the time, and like that rift kind of describes what, at least for like people who weren't like Marxist activists or whatever, which was like a huge contingent of the counterculture. But like a lot of the media represents like the alienation of that, like the alienation from like the world around you, as you no longer feel a part of whatever like movement is animating your society. And I feel like that there's a similar thing that goes on with the French New Wave. And I mean, like people like Jean-Luc Godard get like explicitly political eventually, in his mid and late 60s stuff. But like early on, like there's a lot of like, I mean, we use the word like ennui, the French word, to describe this kind of like sad alienation. And I think that, it's not insignificant that that kind of thing in film is happening at the same time that, a lot of these, kind of global like colonialist orders are shifting and changing. And in some ways, like, youth movements feel disconnected from that. And I mean, like, if you go back to stuff like The Stranger, right? Like Albert Camus and like a lot of existential literature that informed like the French New Wave, like those are very political, right? Like The Stranger involves like a murder with an Algerian, and like a lot of that like stuff. And I think a lot of the legacy of those is more of the kind of interior stuff, and an emotional landscape that describes, and like how do we create meaning out of systems that we've become alienated from, but that's like kind of inseparable from the like political context in which it occurred in.
This movie is not, the movie I'm about to mention is not embroiled in any sort of like military milieu, but what you're describing about the alienation and the ennui that these characters experience reminds me the most of Vivre sa vie, the Jean-Luc Godard movie with Anna Karina, where she's just kind of like bouncing around the city, having sad conversations with people, and eventually becoming a prostitute, right? There's like a political angle to it, even though it is mostly about the emotional experience of people living through like this culture in this period of history, right?
It reminds me a lot of just thinking about kind of how it's handling the zeitgeist of the moment. It reminds me a lot of like somewhat early Kurosawa films, as well as some Ozu films, where just like dealing with the zeitgeist of post World War II Japan, and just kind of like the cultural feeling of not only how people collectively felt, but like different roles in society, and how like Western thought and Western business and things like that start to intersect with like the Japanese values that came beforehand, and just kind of how like it's never, especially in Ozu's movies, it's never like they never expound on that, but it's always something that's
it's a
sitting
backdrop.
there. But it's always there, just like sitting in with these characters as they kind of go about, as they think about their children or their generations come after, like they're thinking about how they were brought up compared to how these other generations were brought up. And to me, a lot of the characters, especially the young characters in this, kind of feel like a reaction to that. Like the leftist No Champagne kid is kind of like this, he's somebody who hasn't had to come up against a lot of these conflicts, and probably just got the tail end, if anything, of like World War II. So he's kind of in this like post-war, like that kind of stuff is not permeating him as much as like some of the older characters. So it's kind of interesting to see how he interacts with these characters compared to how a lot of the older characters, that's why the whole interaction between him and the German couple is so interesting, because the German couple are kind of coming at it like, it's kind of a, interesting thing that we're here in France in the first place, to be honest.
If we could completely switch gears, I want to talk about sort of the structure of this movie and the various characters all sort of like spinning off in different directions, because there's not really a protagonist here. You think it's going to be the guy who kills his boss because that's who we're following for the beginning of the movie, but once he gets stuck in the elevator, we're really not following him anymore. We're kind of checking back in with him. And instead, we are following this young couple who, like we've said, just this feels like a version of the Breathless couple. And then we're following some like police and detectives as they're trying to figure out what's going on. We're also following Jeanne Moreau, who is like distraught because she thinks that the guy who she like her lover, who she's having an affair with, that the guy who kills his boss, she paid him to kill her husband, and she thinks that he ran off with a younger woman after doing that. And like her scenes, I think, are really interesting because almost nothing happens in them. She's just kind of walking through the streets. She's walking through very fast traffic, very slowly, like just eyes straight ahead, not even really registering the danger that is like around her. And then later you see her walking in the rain, and there's like beautiful close-ups of her kind of like sobbing with like rain streaking down her face as well. It's a really like interesting just thing to put in this movie, and a really good performance too, I think.
And it's very much complemented by the Miles Davis score. Which we talked about a little bit. Like, it is almost cliche now to like have like this kind of jazz score while like you're walking through the rain, like emotional. But at the same time, you watch like this movie and you're like, yeah, this is about like, this is
when I'm sad walking through the rain, I want to imagine sad Miles Davis music playing. Like, it's a cliche for a reason. It works.
Yeah, it just kind of accentuates. It really does like accentuate the moment, because yet like I was mentioning in the notes, like you don't have typical like Hollywood lighting. You know, it's a lot of you have the street lamps, you have the coffee shops. So she's just kind of wandering through the streets. She has like this complete like discombobulated look on her face, because she's just trying to figure out. And you have the kind of inner monologue going with the jazz music in the background. It's very like French film, but at the same time it's very
French
effective
film. It's French as fuck.
Yeah. I also think, okay, so we've already talked about a fair deal of the plot, so you know, I don't know if it's even worth saying spoilers, but like at the very end of the movie, you get that scene where her name is Florence. Is that right? Am I remembering that right?
Yeah. Which character?
The woman who pays the dude to kill her husband.
Genre. Probably.
She's being talked to by
it is
the cops. Are the cops talking to her? And they say that she's gonna get a bigger sentence than the guy who actually killed her husband. Right? Is that, I don't know.
I'm a little confused because the cops think different things are happening at different points of the movie.
Oh, you're right. You're right. I'm misremembering, but they think that she has been involved in killing the German couple, though, right? Like she and
because originally they find the only thing they find is the German couple dead and this dude's car just like sitting outside.
Right. Sorry. Yeah, I was misremembering, but like still, regardless. So they think that she and the elevator guy have killed this German couple, and they tell her that she's going to get a harsher sentence than he is. Like, she's going to get like 10 years and he's going to get 5 or something like that. Like, I don't remember the exact numbers. Are you guys remembering this?
I do not remember this detail.
Maybe
asking why,
they said she's going to get like 20 years and he was going to get 10, but he would get off on 5.
Right. And I'm wondering.
Oh, is it because she's the one who paid him? Like, it wasn't necessarily his decision to do it.
I guess that's the
maybe.
rationale.
But there's something like her arc is really interesting, because as you guys said, there's like hardly anything that happens to her. Like she thinks like she's under the mistaken impression that this dude has run off without her, and she's out of his picture now. And then the cops. She gets wrapped up with the cops, and then she's going to get, slapped with this harsher sentence than him. Like, there's something about like the absurdity of that, like that she has been operating under like a mistaken assumption about what has happened. And in the end, there's just this kind of like seemingly capricious, like disparity in terms of who is getting what at the end. I don't know. Like that was kind of an interesting like stinger at the end of the movie for me.
Her role in this whole narrative is interesting because you don't really see the part of the story where she's like negotiating all this. If the movie cold opens on him like calling her and saying "I love you" right before he's about to do the thing, and so she has very little like agency in the movie because the time that she would have had agency has already passed by the time we're in it.
Right.
But I don't know. Another thought, just another thing to remark upon with this movie before we leave it. I think the cinematography is really beautiful, especially like the shadows, like that dark nighttime cinematography that Zach was talking about when she's walking through the rain. You have all this like light from street lamps and car headlights and windows and things like that, just lighting her. There's also a part where when Elevator Guy is stuck in the building and like the lights are on the fritz or something, and it's kind of slowly fading on and off in the section of the building that he's in. And when he eventually like goes, tries to like take a panel out from the floor of the elevator and he's trying to climb down, just that like big black pit that is like the elevator shaft is really good. We were also talking before the show started about the scene. I guess there's two scenes that do this. There's the interrogation scene and there's the dark room scene at the very end where you just have characters standing in these like black voids. That looks really cool.
It looks like it's almost like a black box theater.
Yeah.
Because it's just the light is just on them, so you just see the three characters and like the table, but it's not like it's not like a cop procedural or whatever where you see like the window and like the door and they're like sitting in there. Like no, it just looks like this black void, and these three characters are like the only ones inhabiting it.
I thought like the scenes with the elevator guy were really interesting, just in terms of how they're staged, because there's like they're wordless, and it's just him frantically like scurrying around the very small space of the elevator to try to find something to get himself out. And he's stuck between floors, so he's like pried the door open, but he can't like get through like the little like gap where the floor, like where the actual like floor is. And then, like you just mentioned, Andrew, he like pulls a panel out from the floor and looks down there. And I don't know, like there's something about elevator shafts, and this is true regardless of the movie, but elevator shafts are really unnerving because you're seeing the guts of something that has been designed so that you can't see it, because elevators are really kind of scary things because you're just suspended in this.
I know people who won't take elevators because they're freaked out.
Yeah, and he like pulls out the floor and looks, and you see like the cable that is like holding the elevator there. And like you mentioned, like the huge just pit of a shaft. I don't know, like those sequences almost struck me as like Charlie Chaplin's Modern Times, or maybe something like Tati or something like that, where you have these huge machineries of modern technology, and the human person just is kind of trapped in that environment, at its mercy, which is kind of cool. Like, and the way it's shot, I think, really accentuates that, like where the abstraction of an elevator shaft really comes through, and it's just these kind of pieces of machinery that are too big for a single person to manipulate, and then a hole. That's all that it is. And
there is kind of like a cold sort of clinical feel to the way the movie looks, even though the events of the movie are really over the top, and the emotions of the movie for the characters are often over the top. Like, you don't have a lot of moving camera except the parts where Jeanne Moreau is walking through the rain, really. Like, for the most part, we're just kind of like stuck in these spaces with people. I could definitely see that. And it's a pretty wordless movie throughout too.
Yeah.
I mean, once he's in the elevator, he doesn't really have any lines till the end of the movie. Jeanne Moreau doesn't really have any lines until the end of the movie. Even like when she has conversations with people, the audio like fades it out. Like, we're just listening to Miles Davis and we can't hear what she's saying, to like some random like baggage handler that she like walks by on the street. And then when you have the couple on the run, the woman is speaking quite a bit, but the guy just like doesn't respond to her most of the time. So there's kind of a really heavy reliance on like visual language to convey this movie's ridiculous plot.
Any last thoughts as we head out of the elevator to the gallows?
Have you guys seen any other films by this director?
I've seen My Dinner with Andre.
See, I've never seen that one.
Whoa, hold on. I know you said this earlier in the podcast, but for whatever reason, those dots didn't connect to me until just now.
Yeah. It's
no way.
My Dinner with Andre guy.
Oh, you know what? I've seen Au revoir l'enfant as well.
Yeah, is that good?
It is really good. It's horribly sad. I mean, it's a Holocaust movie. Basically. So, but yeah, it's good, man. Okay, so I've seen several of these. Never mind. Question answered.
There was a thing I was gonna say, if I can remember. I was watching this with Jessie today, and she was wondering, like, at what point did France stop doing the guillotine thing? And we looked it up because there's a guillotine on the cover of the letterbox poster. And it, the title also mentions the gallows. We don't really know what's going to happen to this guy once he gets caught, but we know he does get caught. Apparently, the French were still doing the guillotine until like the 80s or the 90s.
Oh my god!
So it's very possible this guy does just get his head chopped off at the end of this movie,
like a true revolutionary.
Yeah.
Did people like go and pick up McDonald's and go walk to the square to watch somebody get beheaded?
Oh man, I hope not.
That'd be an image.
Man, yeah, I wonder what the last like beheading was in France.
I don't know.
Before you die, just know you're the last beheading in the history of France.
Oh, you think this is bad, but don't worry, we're stopping. You're one more.
That's really cool.
Like those people who don't want us to forgive student loan debt. It's like, I had to pay it. You should too.
I had to be beheaded. You too.
Cuts off.
Builds character. All right. Well, Elevator to the Gallows. It is available. Criterion has it, and I believe it's available on HBO Max as well. So, go watch it if you can.
It's fun.
It's a good thing. It's a good movie. That'll wrap up our episode. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Cinematary, on Twitter and Instagram at handle @Cinematary, and on Letterbox at letterbox.com/Cinematary, where we post a list of all the movies that we talked about in this episode. Next week, real quick, thank you to our patrons, patreon.com/Cinematary, if you'd like to support the show. Thank you to Cam, Chad Newsom, Corey Willingham, Candace Sisson, Ron Hayes, Teresa Marsathi, Titus Arthur, and Tyler Chandler. Thank you so much for your patronage. Next week, we're going to be continuing our Young Critics Watch Old Movies series with Faster Pussycat, Kill Kill.
We're doing some Russ Meyer.
I'm going to say it like with that much emotion next week also. Faster Pussycat, Kill Kill.
There's an exclamation point, Zach.
Yeah.
Actually, there are 2 exclamation points. After Pussycat there are 3. Faster, Pussycat, exclamation point, kill, exclamation point, kill, exclamation point.
I'll work on it all week to get to that point. If you have not caught our series so far, head over to cinematary.com or go to Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to stuff. You can listen to the episodes, and then also head to the website to see what we got coming up next. Because after Faster Pussycat, Kill Kill, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 left. So check them out and catch up. We've had some good ones so far. I just had people talking to me about Bicycle Thieves and Treasure Sierra Madre. Enjoy those episodes. So get to it. Anyway, until next week, thank you for listening.